Hey.
Oh,
You might want to pause the recording and then I need those Zoom numbers. Where can I find those Zoom numbers? I think it's the same number, so
it's the
right?
same, yeah.
Well,
Good afternoon. My name is Kim Schultz, and I'm the Director of Interreligious Engagement and Public Projects here at CTS, and welcome to our Wednesday gathering, our first in December. We are very happy to have you here for this hybrid event. Thank you for all of our online guests, and we'll just get started. And as usual, more folks will join us as we move forward. Today, we are very excited to welcome a new faculty member, Dr. Rochelle Johnson, who will be in conversation with Dr. Kristi Madison. And the title of the talk today is Systemic Oppression and Black Women Living with Depression, a Study and a Caring Way Forward. We look forward to this conversation, but before we get started there, we will start, as we always do, with a centering moment from our community at large in a format that we call Words of Gathering. And I'm very happy today to introduce all the way from Dallas, Texas, Salvi Hassan, who is a DMIN student in chaplaincy with Bayan and CTS. So Salvi, take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Kim, and humbled to be amongst you all. I'm sorry to be joining you all from my car, but I will just go ahead and get us started. In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. May the peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you all. My name is Salvi Hassan. I am a Sunni Muslim, formerly studying the Hanafi tradition at Qalam Seminary, and also pursuing my Master of Divinity at in Islamic chaplaincy at Bayan and CTS. I'm a single mother, to a spirited 8-year-old daughter and a caretaker of my mother and grandmother. I'm humbled for this opportunity to share these reflections and want to thank you all for this kind invitation. I want to begin with a prayer of Prophet Moses, that Prophet Moses made to God when seeking guidance and clarity in delivering his message. He said, "My Lord, expand my chest, make my task easy for me, and remove from me the impediment from my tongue so they may understand my speech." This supplication reflects humility in reliance on God, as well as the importance of fostering understanding, principles that guide us in gatherings like this. I also turn to a chapter in the Quran called Surat al-Asr, which means time, a brief yet profound chapter from the Quran. The translation of this verse is, "By the passage of time, surely humanity is in loss, except for those who have faith, do good deeds, encourage one another to truth, and encourage one another to perseverance." This is from chapter 103, verses 1 to 3. This chapter beautifully emphasizes the shared values of faith, action, and mutual support in truth and patience, principles that transcend differences and help us build bridges of understanding. Reflecting on Islamic history, the early Muslims faced persecution in Mecca and had to migrate to Medina, where they found refuge in a diverse community. Upon arrival to Medina, the Prophet, peace be upon him, offered this timeless advice: spread peace, feed others, maintain family ties, and pray at night while others sleep, and you will enter paradise in peace. I recently just came back from Umrah, actually just yesterday, so that's why I'm a little loopy. And I was in Mecca and Medina, and I reflected on how these principles of compassion, connection, and unity transformed societies and brought people together. As we gather here today, may we embody these timeless values and strive to promote unity, peace building, and mutual understanding. Thank you for this opportunity to connect and reflect. May peace and blessings be upon you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm pleased to introduce our speakers today. First, I'm happy to say a few words about our visiting assistant professor of pastoral theology and psychotherapy and Louisville Institute postdoctoral fellow, Dr. Rochelle Johnson. Dr. Johnson is a womanist theologian whose research focuses on Black women of faith living with clinical depression and practical approaches to pastoral care. She also works as a licensed clinical social worker and practices privately in Chicago. Her main passions are teaching, parish work, and mental health. Her clinical social work experiences encompass the Chicago area, where she has worked in community mental health centers, churches, hospitals, and public schools. Dr. Johnson earned a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Social Work from Loyola University, a Master of Divinity from McCormick Theological Seminary, and a PhD with a concentration in pastoral theology, personality, and culture from Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary. She also holds a certification from the Center of Religion and Psychotherapy. She's on the path to ordination in the United Church of Christ, and she offers her expertise to clergy and congregations in her role as the Emotional Well-Being Consultant for Advocate Health Midwest region. I'm also pleased to introduce our other speaker, Dr. Kristi Madison. Dr. Madison is a licensed professional counselor, a licensed substance abuse treatment practitioner in Virginia, and a nationally certified master addiction counselor. She has over 20 years of experience working with children, adolescents, and adults. Before becoming a licensed therapist, she taught high school and special education classes. And she was a licensed teacher with endorsements in history, social sciences, and K-12 special education. Dr. Madison received her PhD in counselor education and supervision from Walden University. Her research focus was on the help-seeking behaviors of African-American Christian churchgoers. She has a master's degree in professional counseling from Liberty University and a bachelor's of social work from Virginia Commonwealth University. She also has the equivalent of a master's degree in special education, lots of education. Dr. Madison is the owner of Abiding Hope Counseling Services in Manassas, Virginia, where she provides a safe, supportive, and non-judgmental environment where individuals or families can freely explore their concerns. She believes her job is to encourage and empower the clients who trust her to share in their journey. She utilizes empathy and a strengths-based approach with a variety of techniques to work with clients coping with mood disorders, anxiety, PTSD, and substance use in individual and group settings. Her experience is unique in that she has worked outside of her office in homes and in the prison system, in addition to the traditional counseling setting. We're so delighted to welcome these two excellent scholars to our Wednesday gathering today. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Please, if you can, just ignore the cat behind me. I'm going to try my best to ignore her as well. Hopefully she will relocate herself. I appreciate this opportunity to talk about my work. I am delighted that Dr. Madison, who is a peer and a friend, could join me with this. I thank Emily for, Emily for her introduction and everyone who participated in creating the tone for today. If you have any questions, you can put it in the chat, but we may not get to it today. So you'll also see a link that you can add any questions to that link, and then I will respond to your questions at a later time if need be. I've tried my best to condense years of work into 30 minutes, and it was very challenging. But again, I will try my best. So the work of womanist theologians have highlighted the experience of Black women, ethicists and theologians like Dolores Williams, Katie Cannon, Kelly Brown Douglas, Emily Towns, Joanne Terrell have centered, the centering of Black women has been primary to their work, as well as in a similar vein, feminist, Asian, Latino, queer, and Muslim theologians and ethicists have centered the marginalized in their work. And so following those footsteps, I do too. I'm going to share my screen with you. So I just want to preface that while I'm focusing on the lived experience of Black women, I recognize that my research was conducted primarily with African-American women who were middle income, Christian, and cisgendered. So this study cannot be generalized to all Black women, but and it is crucial to remember that Black women are not a monolith. Research shows that Black women are more likely to seek guidance from a spiritual representative rather than seek professional help. So however, many religious leaders are not equipped to help them. This study sought to understand the internal and interpersonal experiences of Black women of faith who live with persistent depression and are learning, and also this study sought to learn how the Black church could support them more. According to a Pew study, Black women, 71% of Black women attend church. 60% participate in Black churches. So when I say Black churches, I define Black churches as churches that the predominant membership is Black and also led by a Black pastor. All of the women attended predominantly Black church led by clergy in my study. So unfortunately, although all these women did attend church, none of them felt safe enough to discuss their depression in the church. And their understanding, however, of depression was shaped by their religious experience. Therefore, the Black church's approach to suffering and sin is crucial for providing effective pastoral care for these women. So my method was to recruit, to go to the churches that I had developed relationships with in the past and pre-screened for women of faith between ages of 25 and 65 who self-identified. So I allowed the women to self-identify themselves as being depressed and as individuals who were depressed and living with persistent depression. Those who volunteered to participate were pre-screened, but in an effort to rule out any severe diagnoses. Each participant agreed to do 2 interviews, an hour interview each, and also to participate in a focus group. Originally, the focus group was not part of my plans, but as I read the individual interviews, I noticed that the women, all of the women were silent about their depression, not only with the clergy, but with their family, with their friends. And none of them was receiving mental health therapy, and only 2 were undergoing psychiatric treatment. So they were taking medication, but only 1 would take it as prescribed. So this led me to explore the connection between their depression and the myth of the strong Black woman, as well as the expectations placed on Black women of faith in the church. So depression is not exclusive to Black women. People of other races and genders also experience it. However, Black women face depression while dealing with the effects of generational trauma from slavery. They are often triply oppressed by racism, classism, and sexism, which complicates their experience even further. Additionally, they are socialized to uphold a facade of strength despite the heavy burden of intersecting oppressions. So according to the CDC, in 2009 through 2012, 7.6% of persons in the US of America lived with depression between the ages over 12 years old. In 2020, WHO reported that 264 million people worldwide had depression. And then in 2003, they reported that 3.8% to 280 million people have depression. Depression is more common in women than in men, affecting 5% of adults overall, with 4% of men and 6% of women affected. So the DSM is an authoritative handbook used by mental health professionals in the US and much of the world for diagnosing mental health conditions. The DSM identifies 7 types of depression in its manual. The common feature of all of those different types of depression is sadness, emptiness, or irritable mood, accompanied by physical and cognitive changes that significantly affect the individual's capacity to function. What differs among them are the duration, time, or presumed etiology. The DSM is developed through a process that includes field trials and tests assessing variations in depressive symptoms. These trials have predominantly involved white participants, which increases the risk of missing depression in racial and other ethnic groups. Depression in Black women is often underreported, undertreated, and understudied. Research indicates that standard screening tools are not cannot adequately assess depression in this demographic, mainly because many of the tools focus on feelings of sadness without considering somatic and self-critical symptoms. A recent study by NYU examined the variations in depressive symptoms among Black women. The findings revealed that participants were more likely to report somatic symptoms such as fatigue, insomnia, decreased libido, and self-critical symptoms, including self-hate and self-blame, rather than typical symptoms like hopelessness or depressed moods. They also reported experiencing anhedonia, an inability to experience pleasure, and irritability. So this study reminded me of an experience I had a few years ago in my office. While sitting in my office, I heard a knock at the door, and I opened the door. It was a new referral, and it was a petite, dark-skinned African-American woman with long Black hair standing before me. And she had the biggest smile I had ever seen, and it was a bright smile. And I thought to myself, why is she here? She had one of the biggest and brightest smiles I had ever seen. Based on her cheerful expression, one might assume she had no worries. However, despite her bright smile, she struggled with primary symptoms such as irritability, insomnia, low energy, and low self-esteem, all of which impacted her functioning at home and at work. As she denied feeling sad or depressed, she did deny feeling sad or depressed. However, her impatience with her young students and her son told a different story. By focusing on the content of our discussion rather than exclusively scrutinizing her behavior, I created an environment where she could eventually identify and understand the sadness that underlined her irritability. Together, we explored and identified the root causes of her sadness, which included early childhood trauma that she had not processed or worked through. Like many Black women, she had learned to mask her sadness and continue performing without seeking treatment. She had disconnected or suppressed the sadness as a means of survival. She was earning income for her family, but not thriving due to unprocessed trauma and sadness that lay dormant within her. For this study, I used a pre-screening tool only to, again, rule out any severe diagnoses, such as like bipolar or major depression, and any psychotic conditions. And participants selected for the study reported experiencing depressive symptoms for at least 2 years, like appetite disturbance, sleep issues, fatigue, low self-esteem, poor concentration. These symptoms significantly impacted their social, occupational, or daily functioning. The focus on persistent depression for me was due to its higher prevalence among African-American women. The narratives in the study focus on the experiences of women I refer to as Sheila, Mandy, Nyla, Sherry, Alice, and Mari. These women come from diverse backgrounds, varying in age, marital status, and annual income, ranging from $4,000 to $65,000. They also differ in religious denominations and educational levels, with qualifications ranging from high school to a doctoral degree. I learned that their voices served as valuable resources for anyone seeking to provide adequate pastoral care and spiritual care for Black women dealing with persistent depression. Three dominant themes emerged. Firstly, the women in the study overwhelmingly had adverse cultural experiences embedded in their depressive experience. Also was personal trauma, intergenerational trauma, collective trauma, and ongoing oppression. Secondly, their primary means of understanding their depressive experience was through a religious lens. Their faith and spiritual beliefs were used to understand their suffering and make meaning of their depression. Thirdly, they reported feeling that the church expected them to be strong and not show weakness. The women reported believing that faith and identity as Black women were synonymous with strength, and to be depressed was viewed as a weakness in self and faith. A social, cultural, historical, and Caucasian perspective prompts us to examine the interconnectedness among various forms of trauma and persistent depression in Black women. Black women in particular endure a disproportionate amount of trauma and report experiencing depression as frequently, if not more, than white women. Emerging social science research highlights stress as a significant factor that increases an individual's vulnerability to depression. Traditionally, the biomedical model has been dominant to understanding the etiology of persistent depression. The medical model views depression as a disease rooted in physical factors such as brain, chemistry, and genetics, leading to a perception of the body as diseased and in need of a cure. However, numerous studies have consistently shown a direct link between adverse childhood experiences and adult depression. Additionally, various studies in the social sciences indicate that stress significantly heightens vulnerability to depression. I argue that the disease is in society, not the individual. As Fannie Lou Hamer pointedly said, America is sick and man is on the critical list. Adopting a psychological perspective on the etiology of depression, one that recognizes the influence of social stressors, trauma, ongoing oppression on psychological health, could significantly destigmatize depression and encourage many individuals to break the silence surrounding their experience. The weakness is not in them. The weakness is in a society that promotes ideas of white supremacy. This project takes an embodied approach to understanding contemporary Black women's experience with depression and decentering a disembodied perspective that isolate mental processes from bodily experiences. It argues that attributing depression solely to an individual's head neglects societal and ecological factors contributing to their condition. An embodied perspective recognizes individuals as whole beings interacting with a troubled world, highlighting significant pathogenic factors such as adverse childhood experiences, disruptions in self-object experiences, trauma, and ongoing oppression. While some researchers classify depression strictly as a disease, there is no evidence for such a categorization. Scholars generally agree that cultural forces magnify the symptoms of depression. Nancy Krieger's eco-social theory emphasizes theory and context in understanding health. It defines embodiment as an active reciprocal engagement with the world. Thus, Black women's depressive symptoms represent the body's response to oppressive conditions, revealing unspoken sorrows that seek understanding and validation. Self-psychology theory asserts that the self utilizes self-objects to meet its needs. Kohut defines self-objects as entities that serve or are experienced as integral to the self. Early self-object experiences with primary caregivers shape the self and provide a framework for understanding the world. Later in life, these experiences expand to include peers, teachers, careers, and cultural self-objects. According to self-psychology, individuals need 7 types of self-object experience to maintain a healthy self. Kohut identified 3 of those. Mirroring, that means the need to feel recognized and affirmed, to feel accepted and responded to. Idealizing, a need to experience oneself as part of an admired and respected self-object. Other, a need for the opportunity to be accepted by and merge into a stable, calm, non-anxious, powerful, wise, protective other who possesses qualities the self experiences as lacking in the self. And third, alter ego, the need for similarity with a self-object fostering peer relationships and learning. Optimal experiences of these self-objects, characterized by empathic attunement and healthy frustrations, lead to what he called transmuting internalization. This process allows an individual to internalize aspects of the self-object, which is the caregiver, forming a cohesive self and transitioning from reliance on an archaic mode of contact to drawing nourishment from empathic relationships in adulthood. According to Kohut, a healthy self remains cohesive and stable, while psychopathology arises from trauma and disharmony stemming from disrupted self-object processes. In this study, only one woman, her name was Mari, described her childhood as one that provided an optimal mirroring and idealizing experience with caregivers. She felt a deep connection with her mother, who validated her feelings and offered support. Mari also had positive memories of her father, stating, "I always felt safe because my father was always there. He was larger than life." Conversely, 6 of the 7 women described traumatic childhood experiences and less optimal mirroring experiences and idealizing experiences. I'm highlighting Tanya's story because it illustrates the adverse effects of both intergroup and intragroup oppression, as well as how the myth of the strong Black woman adversely impacts the lives of Black girls and women. As the youngest of 9, Tanya recalled her parents being emotionally distant. She said that the emotional distance not only was with her and her siblings, but with each other. And this was exacerbated by her father's infidelity and her mother's alcoholism. Tanya expressed, "My mother was unhappy and never asked about my life. I felt depressed because of her." When she saw support from her father or sister named Donna, their responses lacked empathy. Tanya recounted, "When I confided in Donna about my mother, she said I had to be strong and learn to walk around the mess. When I confided in my dad, he said, just get your education and, just make sure you get your education so you can do better for yourself." Desperate for validation, Tanya tried to assert her agency. She called the police. She stated, "I called the police and said, it has gotten so bad. My mother is mean to me and I don't believe she is my mother. I don't like her. I don't believe that a mother would treat her daughter this way." The lady listened to her and then she gave her some advice. She says, "Let it make you stronger." Tanya said, "I just wanted somebody to come and get me." The officer, Tanya's dad, and Donna's unreasonable expectations for Tanya align with the broad cultural practice of adultifying Black girls and expecting them to have abnormal strength and a higher pain tolerance. The police officer didn't make a home visit, didn't link them to any mental health services. If they had functioned as idealizing figures, they could have served as containers for her emotional pain. and shown empathy by feeling with her. Instead, they created distance and isolation by denying her feelings. Furthermore, Tanya's relationships with her sisters were strained because her mother favored the lightest skinned sister, creating lingering resentment among them. Although Tanya was not the lightest, she was lighter than her sister Maggie, with whom she particularly had a difficult relationship. In her article, A Perennial Mourning, Scott discusses how preconceptions about Blackness have affected the African-American psychic since pre-American slavery days. Tanya's mother's unresolved trauma impacted her family dynamics, leading to aggression that was passed down to her daughters. Tanya's father noted that her mother was unhappy due to being mistreated by her own biological father, which was related to her dark skin. Her parents' untreated trauma and mental health issues, which were symptoms of a sickness in society, disrupted her parents' ability to be optimal self-objects for Tanya and her sister. In 2020, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration surveyed African Americans aged 12 and older regarding drug abuse and health. The findings revealed that 94% reported living with untreated substance use disorders. And among adults aged 18 and older, 62% had an untreated mental health condition. 1 million faced untreated severe mental conditions, and nearly 2 million experienced a co-creating untreated mental health condition. Additionally, around 400,000 adolescents aged 12 to 17 reported untreated major depression. The lack of treatment leaves individuals and families isolated and vulnerable to harmful influences from their environment. In interviews, 6 of the 7 women reported living with caregivers who were exhibiting addictive behaviors and negatively impacted their well-being. None of the women in this study received mental health support as a child to cope with their adverse childhood experiences and trauma. Additionally, their parents did not receive treatment for counseling for such issues as trauma, addiction, and domestic violence. According to some studies, efforts to eliminate oppressive conditions and to implement early mental health interventions for both parents and children would help prevent cases of depression among adult Black women. According to cohort theory, a cohesive self is formed when a child receives appropriate mirroring, idealization, and twinship. This cohesive self is thought to remain free from pathological conditions. In adulthood, mental health is maintained through positive cultural self-object experiences. However, he did not consider the impact of negative cultural experiences that adversely impact parenting styles, which ultimately affect the self-object experience. Nor did he consider the negative cultural self-object experiences that adversely affect adult mental health. Building on Kohut's definition of cultural self-object, Phyllis Shepard argues that cultural self-objects are not limited to individuals. They also include symbols, language, institutions, and cultural productions that fulfill the needs of individuals and groups. The self is thus both a cultural and a psychological construct. Womanist thought posits that attributing adult depression solely to a lack of early positive empathic self-object experiences is only the half-told truth. For Black women, developmental selves interact with cultural self-objects that emerge from both cultural stereotypes from outside their group and cultural narratives leading to depressive symptoms. However, despite these critiques, self-psychology does offer a therapeutic framework for counseling Black women dealing with depressive symptoms. In the therapeutic relationship between caregiver or therapist or clergy or chaplain, the latter can experience empathy, positive self-object experiences, empowering them to move forward in healing and recovery. However, to be effective, spiritual and psychological care for Black women experience the persistent depression, caregivers must demonstrate cultural awareness and act in solidarity with these women who are affected. They must be willing to resist ongoing oppression. So this is a disturbing image of a 9-year-old girl who was handcuffed by the police and pepper sprayed following a call her mother made to the police to get help because the mother was trying to get her to the hospital for psychological reasons. What transpired between the young girl and the police also symbolizes how the tentacles of slavery continue to influence Black girls and women's encounters with the criminal justice system. On January 9th, when her mom made the call to seek help, the police refused to take her to the hospital. Instead, they put her under arrest. They handcuffed her and pepper sprayed her. When the little girl screamed out in pain, the male officer replied, although she was 9, stop acting like a child. The girl responded, I am a child. The officer's dismissal of her pain and their reference to her behavior as childlike reflects an ingrained societal problem, one that traces back to the trauma of American slavery. Historically, the denial of womanhood and childhood for enslaved Black females served to exploit and dehumanize them. These beliefs did not only justify the harsh treatment of Black bodies, but also allow for the abuse of their physical and emotional suffering, evident in the legacy of medical exploitation during surgery. Elba's attempt to secure adequate care for her daughter was thus complicated by the intersections of historical trauma and ongoing oppression faced by Black and Brown communities. The police encounter serves as a reminder of how deeply embedded these issues are, suggesting that many Black individuals may feel compelled to remain invisible, particularly during a vulnerable moment such as a mental health crisis. Recognizing and uplifting these narratives is essential to foster a more compassionate approach to mental health support to marginalized communities. In addition to connecting their mental health struggle to a confluence of negative cultural experiences, personal trauma, and systemic barriers, the women in the study also highlighted the influence of spiritual challenges shaping their understanding of their depression. Their embedded theologies, which shaped their understanding of depression, mirrored the perspectives of the Black church regarding body, sin, suffering, and sacrifice. Their theology of depression included the following elements. Depressive feelings are the result of a moral failing or a flawed, sinful body. Suffering is considered redemptive and serves a divine purpose. Depression is a weakness that should be resisted, and strength should be embodied. This theology views the body as flawed and sinful, glorifying suffering and strength, while perceiving depression as a weakness or a character flaw. Researchers such as Dr. Lee Butler and Kelly Brown Douglas was utilized to conceptualize how the Christian antibody views influence these women's perspectives on their depression in her text, What's Faith Got to Do with It? Kelly Brown Douglas argues that Christianity's theological core, influenced by Platonized thought, will sanction the oppression of undervalued bodies. She writes, Plato argued that before its existence in the body, the soul belonged to the non-sensible world of forms. The body, however, is part of the world of senses. Thus, the soul represents the permanent and more valued aspect of a human. The monistic bent attracted Christians to Platonic thought. She further argues that early Christian history and Platonized thought influenced the theology of the Black denominational church, shaping its views on the body, views that ultimately trickled down to the pews. In his text, Liberating Our Dignity and Saving Our Souls, Dr. Butler writes, due to the ways we have tended to construct our theologies based on spirit-body split, I believe we have a preference for a disembodiment that always perceives our body as unhealthy or flawed. This statement aligned with Alice, one of the study participants who viewed depression as a flaw given to her by God. She stated, I feel that I could better handle the triggers of depression if I let my Christian life become more evolved. I wouldn't be as depressed. I don't think that I'm going to ever not be depressed. I think there's always going to be a level there because that is one of the flaws he gave me. When the church highlights the depravity of humanity, it becomes incredibly oppressive for those who are marginalized. This emphasis reinforces self-critical thoughts, a symptom of both depression and oppression, imposing extra psychological burdens on women who are already exhausted from their struggle. The women in this study separated their depressed and different bodies from their church, fearing judgment and diminished sense of value. When asked about their silence during the focus group, the women discussed the stigma surrounding mental health conditions both in and outside of the church. Given their personal experiences and the experience of their ancestors, it is understandable that the women in the study turned to the cross to make sense of their situations. Identifying with a crucified Christ, whom his Father sacrificed for redemptive purposes, helped the women reconcile in their minds an image of a loving, all-knowing, and all-powerful God with a God who permits human suffering. Believing their suffering is a part of a divine plan gives the women a sense of control. They can transcend their suffering if they become good enough, endure enough, pray enough, and are obedient enough. From a psychological perspective, God represents an idealizable self-object experience for these women. It is difficult to see God as a powerful, protective, and wise part of oneself if God permits suffering for no good reason. Therefore, in the women's mind, God remains powerful, protective, and wise if God allows human suffering for a greater purpose. Although it has some psychological benefits, this internalizing belief regarding suffering as redemptive narrows women's understanding regarding causes of depression and recovery. Thinking individually about their depression and suffering, seeing it as a personal sin matter that needs to be transcended, creates isolation and more suffering. When suffering is seen as the product of personal sin, the social evils that undergird and exacerbate depression are not resisted. Child abuse, racism, sexism, classism, heterosexism. Only one of the participants in this study sought treatment for their depression. None of the women were working through traumas contributing to their depression. An embodied theology of depression takes the depression as part of the human condition and sees God and others as potential co-sufferers. Depression is not seen as a dysfunctional part of the self that needs to be extracted or discarded. Instead, the depressed body is seen as God declared it very good. So 3 steps toward destigmatizing depression in the church include deconstructing the church's theology of depression, challenging the strong Black woman myth in the Black church, and reimagining a liberating theological interpretation of Christ's crucifixion. First, a flawed theology that interprets depression as a result of personal sin or character flaw and glorifies sufferings and resilience and perceives depression as a spiritual weakness can harm vulnerable individuals. Caring communities should work together to challenge these erroneous beliefs. Second, during slavery, Black women endured significant abuse and were expected to embody strength for survival. Afterward, they primarily worked in service jobs burdened by societal expectations. In the late 1800s and 1900s, they organized for civil and political rights for all Black people, not just men. The Black church served as a crucial link between those organizers and the community, with many women internalizing the belief that service and sacrifice equated salvation, reinforcing the strong Black woman myth. This led to silence about their struggle and high rates of depression and chronic illness. To combat this issue, the church must examine its role in perpetuating the strong Black woman myth and focus on addressing internal and external systemic problems rather than expecting Black women to bear burdens alone. Finally, the researcher advocates for a liberating interpretation of Christ's crucifixion that affirms God as a co-sufferer, centers Jesus's ministry, rejects bodily sacrifice, and declares all bodies are sacred, and acknowledges the impact of social sin on suffering. I will end with recommendations for implementation and allow Dr. Madison to ask questions. I just want to raise these 5 points in terms of recommendations for implementation. Self-care is a primary challenge for those in the helping profession or the caregiving role. So centering yourself is not selfish. It is a life-giving and building, and it builds emotional resilience, which is essential if you care for marginalized populations and seek mental health care when needed. 2, ministry has a tendency to skip over emotions to focus on the more important spiritual matters. Essentially, especially if the counselee's behavior is deemed sinful. Spiritual issues are essential, but if an individual doesn't feel safe, they won't be willing to share the spiritual aspects of their story. So safety and trust are paramount and are established when we take time to provide empathic listening, which includes deep listening from the story's content and prioritizing emotional care. Listening to content includes engaging Black women in discussions about their social and cultural experiences, as well as understanding their embodied theologies that influence how they understand their depression. To understand the experience of Black women, womanist literature is an excellent starting point. While I'm not aware of any pastoral theology care texts that specifically focus on Black women and depression, there are several resources available, including works by sociologists, psychologists, and autobiographies that address this issue. It is also essential to build relationships with Black women, be self-aware, and strive to recognize and eliminate any personal biases you may have regarding Black women. Access resources that offer mental health training and for clergy and others in caring roles. And lastly, be aware of your own biases that you may have regarding persons who have mental health struggles. Openly discuss mental health issues in your communities. Advocate for policy changes that consider the impact of social stressors and oppression on mental health, and encourage local politicians to prioritize mental health for all people. So I'll stop here and let Dr. Madison. Ask any questions she may have.
Hello, thank you for having me. And I just had a couple of questions. So one, I heard you talking a little bit about the overall themes from the women that you studied. And I know in general, with my research, it also showed that, particularly in the African-American community, depression and other mental health disorders are often seen as a sign of spiritual weakness, which then, can turn into doubts about their faith, their ability to pray effectively, whether or not they're fasting enough, and those things that sometimes we hear, So are there some proactive measures that leaders can implement or that counseling ministries can implement to help support these women and foster like a healthier perspective? Because the other thing you said was that none of the women that you had felt safe. So do you have any ideas about how the church can help people to feel safer if they need to approach about depression?
Thank you for that question. I think one thing that faith leaders can do is take responsibility for how they address mental health in their preaching. They need to be responsible and seek mental health care when necessary for themselves. And I think one of the most effective ways to understand the vulnerabilities that women have that are depressed is to be aware of your own vulnerabilities and have worked through some of your own emotional challenges. I think additionally too, because I think doing your own work with a mental health professional helps you to be more empathic. I also think that they should not preach that depression is a result of sin, or that it's ordainedly divine for some greater purpose. Again, these ideas can promote isolation and encourage suffering and silence. That in their preaching, they should acknowledge that depression is just part of being a human and not indicative of faith, weakness in faith. I do recall a participant who expressed a sigh of relief when I mentioned that it is possible to be both depressed and faithful. She shared that she had not thought it was possible to be both.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Another question that I have, and just to kind of speak to what you were just saying, I know when I've been working with women, well, people in general, but with women who have been struggling in that area, you know, sometimes I'll show them where the prophet Elijah was depressed even after an encounter with God. So it definitely was not that he wasn't faithful. It's just he was going through some stuff at the time. And so that sometimes also helps people to normalize, you know, and feel like, oh, you know, so if that person could be depressed, then you know, it normalizes it for them. So one more question. I know we're running a little bit short on time. Some of the research that I've done indicated that African American Christian churchgoers were more inclined to seek professional help if they felt comfortable approaching their own leadership. And so what are some actionable ways for pastors and leaders to create safe spaces and establish community networks so that not only do people feel safe coming to them, but then there is like a referral network or referral source, and some resources for these women who may be struggling?
That's a good question. I think one of the things that faith leaders could do is collaborate with mental health providers in their communities and in the surrounding areas. And not only collaborating like to obtain information, but also inviting them to the church. I think that establishing a trusting relationship and showing someone that the church members could feel connected to or feel like they can trust, I think it'll be easier for that transition. As you say, that more, if they seek help from the pastor, they're more likely to be willing to seek outside help. And so the pastor can be that bridge. But I also think, at least from my experience, it's very intimidating to seek professional help. And so to bridge that gap by inviting those type of providers into the church, I think can be helpful. Also allowing them to do workshops in the church, I think can be helpful because that helps women. Again, it kind of breaks that silence, right? That we're centering mental health. We know that mental health challenges is something that humans experience, and we can create an environment where this is normalized, that it's okay to seek help, and that is not a defect in character if you need to seek help.
Okay. And thank you. I know that we've worked hard in our communities to kind of try to, I think you've done it, and I know I've done it, tried to kind of break into those communities and get some buy-in from the local churches. I do know that there are a couple of questions, and there's a comment in the chat. Somebody said, Karen Walker said, I recently attended a conference where I learned about the adultification of Black girls and how it contributes to depression.
Okay.
And Richard Chrisman asked, what can we do to offset the way bad theology violates the human soul, such as, believing that God is all powerful, leading to self-recrimination, kind of like what we were talking about. So, like I said, I know time's about up, so I know that you said you would respond.
So
I wanted to let you know.
Please drop that question in the link and I will respond. Thank you. I know we're out of time.
Thank you so much. Yes, the link is in the chat. If people have further questions or reflections, I know Dr. Johnson would be eager to read them and to respond on a one-by-one, since we are out of time now. If you need that, let us know, but that does go directly to Dr. Johnson. This was a very powerful and important conversation. We are so grateful for both of your time and for sharing this work with us, Dr. Johnson, and I hope it's the beginning of a conversation. This is also being recorded, so if there are people in your community and life that you would like to share this conversation with, that'll be available soon, and we're happy to share that as well, so that you can share this conversation. Just wanted to end to see if there's any community announcements that anyone either in the room or online would like to make for the good of the group. You can unmute yourself if you're online, because I can't see you. Okay, hearing none, I will just remind everyone that our final Wednesday gathering of the year is coming up in 2 weeks. It is a virtual, and it will feature a talk with Reverend Yvonne Delk, who is the first Black woman ordained in the UCC. So we hope you will join us for that final conversation of this year. And hearing nothing else, see you all in 2 weeks, and thank you again to our guests.
Thank you.
Thank you.